Hey everyone, welcome to the stage of the Caledonia location. And if you're joining here live or later on, super glad you joined Pastor John and I for this conversation on God, life, and money, and whatever else we'll delve into.
Who knows?
So, just question, funniest thing you've either read or seen in the last couple weeks?
Oh, man.
I know I sent you a pretty funny video clip, but I don't know if there's something that beats that or...
You did send a pretty funny video clip. The funniest thing, though, maybe this was, were you the one that sent me the hotel one?
Yeah.
Is that you?
Hotels
yeah,
Be Like.
That was really funny. Hotels Be Like, that was really funny. A couple weeks ago, this might have been longer than that ago, we saw the Apparently video, the little kid who says apparently all the time.
Yeah.
And apparently watch the news. Apparently, that was great. We got a lot of laughs.
Yeah.
Out of that one too.
Yeah.
So
don't be that guy. Don't be that apparently guy.
no, don't be. Don't be.
If you're looking for something funny today, I think it's just under 4 minutes. Type in Trey Kennedy Hotels Be Like on YouTube and send me a thankful email later. So yeah, it's pretty good. I think that's probably the funny. I watched it at like 10 p.m. at night, so that probably increased the funniness for me.
Definitely helped.
I was literally crying laughing at some of those. And then I had to show my wife, and I was laughing again. So, if you're looking for a good little laugh.
That video of That's the Worst, that little clip, I can't remember the comedian's name from Liberty. That's the Worst. Tim Hawkins.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a fun clip.
Yes, about basically third world
and
problems.
And his daughter who... showed up at the mall and her friends weren't there, and she said that was the worst. And in comparison, that's pretty minor.
Not too bad.
Yeah,
not too bad.
Yes.
Well, cool. Yeah, some people are jumping on live here, and if you're listening later, really the hope for today is to have a conversation that will help you, and will hopefully be encouraging and maybe equip you even to further live what we've been talking about on Sundays and around this theme of God, life, and money. And first thing I was thinking about in terms of this conversation is just the order of those, Sometimes people put maybe God last or something like that. Maybe just talk about some of the heart or the inspiration of these couple of weeks we're in, talking about how does God's purpose, God's design to shape life, and that life obviously leads to things like money and time and resources. Just talk about some of that. And maybe the hope for all of us as we move through these together.
Yeah, a lot of that comes out of just this desire to say, boy, all three of those are important. A lot of times I think we can start talking about money in spiritual context and diminish its value or only paint it as evil. And yet it really is an important part of life. I mean, whatever the resource is in a given economy, it is an important part of life. And so in some ways it's almost to say money really is important, but where does money fit in relationship to God and the rest of life?
Sure.
And how can we take some of the pressure out of money and let it be important, but not let it squeeze our life and shrink our life? So a lot of it's just saying, if we can get things in the right order, things just work.
Yeah.
Things flow better when they're in the right order.
Yeah.
And when we flip them around, I mean, I think putting them in the right order is a little bit like putting Drano down the drain, right? It just can clear some of what clogs the drain, makes the water drain slowly. Yeah. So put them in the right order and say, this is how we live them best.
Yeah. And in the New Testament, I think it's Paul that writes, God is a God of order.
Yeah.
That's that's part of how God shapes life. And we talked about last week, the first week of the series on the 7th, a little bit how God sees money. How does actually God see money as a part of our lives? Can you just hit some of those? I don't want to give it away. So I was about to give it away in the question, but I'm not going to do that. So just a little bit, how does God see money as part of life and how he's created us?
Yeah, because God creates us on purpose, then everything else is designed to help shape that purpose. And so God sees money as if he owns all of it. I mean, it does all belong to him. That the scriptures paint that over and over again. But God's also honest enough. I mean, Jesus said it real tangibly, that money is a part of a battle for our soul. Because of this reality of tension and of sin in the world, there's a fight for our soul, and one of the leading oppositions to a thriving soul is money.
Sure.
And so God's real clear to say there's a battle going on there. And then he says, look, because there's a battle, let it be part of your growth process. Let it be part of how we relate together. Let's work together through the issue of money. And so that can be part of the growth process. And so I think, again, God's very permission giving in that. He's not trying to say do away with money. He's trying to say let's keep it in our proper place because I actually own it anyway.
Yeah. And I think last week you talked about, or maybe in some preface for the series as a whole, Jesus talking about money more than prayer and things like heaven or hell.
Heaven and hell, yeah.
And he talked about generosity, which implies sometimes we have this notion as Christians, like money's bad.
Right.
Or I should, if I'm really faithful, if I'm really holy, I'll have no money and like only shop certain places or whatever. And Jesus talking about generosity implies that we should have money.
Right.
Should be good stewards. Maybe just talk about some of your thoughts around Jesus talking about that more than really spiritual things like prayer and worship and, all the stuff that we may think, oh, that's what Jesus was about, when he really talked a lot about money.
Yeah. Well, some of our misunderstanding there is the constant misnomer we have that certain things are spiritual and certain things are not. Everything is spiritual, and your whole life is spiritual. There's not a spiritual component to your life. Your whole life is spiritual. We've said this a lot at Journey. God doesn't really care at all about your spiritual life.
Yep.
What we label our spiritual life. He cares about your whole life. Our whole life is a spiritual experience with Jesus. And so when Jesus talks about money, he is talking about a very spiritual thing. And every financial decision we make is a spiritual decision. I think it was Ron Blue who said that first. But it's every financial decision we make is a spiritual decision. It's a decision about lordship, about priority, about trust. Yeah. Maybe it's about generosity. And so, that's part of how we need to think about it. The other thing is Jesus, and really this is God all throughout the scriptures, right? But Jesus was a master communicator. And the thing that Jesus was always building was common ground. So some of Jesus' conversations about money were with people who didn't have any interest in prayer yet. That wasn't even on their radar. They had a money question. They had a life question. Or Jesus is trying to paint a life principle. And to talk about prayer, they're not interested in prayer, but they've all got money. Yeah. And so they're interested in money, right? And so Jesus is like, let me talk about a common ground issue, which is what he did over and over again, right, in things like the parable. So to me, it's not surprising that Jesus talked about money so much because he's talking to people of all different walks of life, some of whom just aren't even thinking about prayer yet.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing would be, like we're talking about in this week, is purpose. Yeah. Right? Jesus talked about purpose, and that's the second move in this series, talking about we have this big purpose, which feels very sweeping and applies to everyone. And then calling, like inside of that purpose. Can you just talk about like that common purpose and calling, and is calling just a career? Is it just like, am I called to a job, or is that bigger or smaller than a vocation? And maybe just the intersection of some of those. And let's hop around that for a second. Okay.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, we have a common purpose. We were all created by God, common purpose, and that purpose, has a few expressions. It's to be with God, to be like God, and to help others be with God and like God. God created us originally out of generosity, because He wanted to be with us, out of the overflow of His love. And God created. What's interesting when we think about generosity is God's the first generous one. God's always been a sharer. And a lot of times we get around money and we think about what's mine, and yet God created us like Him, and He's a sharer by nature. He's giving us His image. He's giving us His life, and so He created us to be like Him, and then to help other people be with Him and like Him, because multiplication was always part of what God designed. Before sin, He said, hey, go be fruitful and increase, fill the earth. He always wanted humanity to expand. Once sin gets introduced to the equation, he says, hey, okay, let's help people get back to me. Let's help people get back to the original purpose. Help other people be with me and like me. Multiply the number of people with me and like me. And that's this common purpose that all of us have. Be with Him, like Him, help others be with Him and like Him. But we're also different. We all look different, sound different, act different, different strengths, different weaknesses. And that's where we start to see the unique calling. Yeah. God said, look, you aren't responsible for the entire mission You are responsible to steward your part of the mission, and I've made you to do a part. And when you do that, you will be remarkably satisfied, even when it's hard.
Yeah.
One of the intriguing things to me about that unique calling thing is, again, Jesus, that's where money comes in, right? Because then the calling is more important than the career. And when we see a calling, it's like, oh, okay, my calling, I'll have a calling way past a career potentially.
Yeah.
I'll have a calling. Calling will give purpose to me even in my retirement. Calling can give purpose to me even before I have a career.
Yeah.
Calling gives purpose to me as a parent, as a friend, as just a follower of Jesus in my entire life.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is really inviting us to live something so much bigger than money and say, look, if you can make calling decisions, those will influence your money decisions instead of making money decisions first, which may cause you to miss your calling.
Yeah. Yeah, which if you haven't watched part 1 and part 2 of this series, I invite you to go back and watch or listen to that. I don't want to recap all of this message. What were maybe some of the things in the message that you're like, oh, this is really huge for us, but I might not have time in a Sunday box to maybe talk around some of those things? Before you answer that, I was just thinking as you're talking, like, there's so much of our culture right now that's intrigued by, Enneagram and personality tests and work styles. And I wonder if some of that is us trying to figure out, not just who am I and how do I interact with myself, but what's my unique contribution to the world and the people I'm around. And that's obviously calling. Like you said, it's so much bigger than just a certain job or a job description or a payroll, agreement or something like that. And I've known people that they've had a very distilled calling. Like it's very clear, but they may have had 5 jobs, and it all pushes different parts of that calling to the forefront, which is really interesting. But maybe some things inside this whole theme that we didn't have time for in a Sunday morning type message that you feel like these could be really huge for us.
Yeah, so we could drill down a little more on that initial point we made in the message of, break whatever the normal box is.
Yeah.
I think for most of us, me included, if we just took some time and we pulled back a little bit and we said, what is my plan for life and how did it form? What steps do I think I'm supposed to take? I'm supposed to get an education. I'm supposed to, kind of get through high school, do whatever that is. I'm supposed to either get a job or find a trade, or I'm supposed to go to college. And I'm supposed to get some type of education there, and then I'm supposed to get a career. There's a template we've been handed, and the risk is, I think sometimes we don't know where the template came from, and what the template's missing.
It's just there.
It's just there. It's the common template, right?
Yeah,
and yet that's part of what over and over again the scriptures invite us to say. Look, the ingredients of the template may not be bad, but they're often incomplete. And so that's part of Jesus saying, hey, just break that template and ask, wait a second, where does calling enter into that? What decisions will I make that will help me explore my calling?
Yeah.
Not just what decision will I make that'll get me the best education and the best job. And again, I've tried to be so clear about this. Get a job. If you want an education, get an education. Find a trade. Do whatever it is. I mean, we need to do things and do it well, and we've got skills and abilities. But if we can marry them with calling, and if we can let calling influence those, I think all too often, and again, we've all, I think, been prone to it. We get the career and then look for God in the career, instead of looking for God and following God on the way to the career.
Yeah.
And so, and again, just so how to say, how do we break that template? What template was I handed? What template has culture handed us? And why does God through the scriptures ask us to break that template and not be conformed to that pattern anymore?
Yeah.
It's because it might look good, but may be incomplete.
Yeah. You really subtly, you briefly touched on this. Not subtle. It was very clear, but it was brief about maybe some of us, especially farther down the road. Like I would be in a box where I'm still trying to figure out what I know. I have a job, and a lot of the job hits on a lot of things I'm gifted and invited to do by Jesus. I'm still trying to figure out, do I have do I really grasp and understand that one sentence calling, the purpose and the people and the place, all that stuff. But you talked about maybe for some of us, we'll get paid to do the exact calling. So maybe for some people, I feel called to write to influence the next generation. And it's like, you're an author. You get a pay stub that goes towards that and it fuels it. Others of us may bring an income from something that you're wired to do, and you probably have some competency and some joy in it. But then it actually fuels something bigger than your job and much more. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
There's maybe those two, and at different points in our lives, we understand that. So for the 18-year-old, maybe don't get salty that you're like, I'm not right in my sweet spot.
Right.
You can still fuel a calling that's so much bigger than an 8 to 5, 9 to 5 thing.
Absolutely.
Maybe just talk about those two things, even in your own life, that experience, and how at different points those might be really real for a lot of people.
Yeah, and some of what you're touching on there a little bit, like we grow into our calling. For most of us, the discovery of our calling is a gradual thing,
Sure.
right? It's an overtime thing. There are some who have an epiphany moment, and the sky's open and heaven's open, but for most of us, it's a gradual thing. And I think about, like, one of the first people that I saw kind of live this was a guy named Rob, and he was actually one of my youth leaders when I was a kid growing up in church, and he's influenced my life in a lot of ways. But one of the ways was Rob had a job, and when he got his job, it probably wasn't connected to a calling. He probably didn't fully understand what his calling was, but he was really good at his job. But he was asking that question, why am I here, and what is my life about more than this job? And over the course of time, he's good at his job, so he gets some promotions in this warehouse setting and in this company, and he starts leading some things. And he finds himself in all these environments where he's investing in guys that are younger than him. And that's what brings him alive. And he loves helping them on the job and in their life.
Yeah.
And he loves it. And so then he finds himself, oh, well, I can do this everywhere. So he starts working with people like me in a church youth group. And he unlocks a calling that he's made to invest in young men. He impacted so many of us, and probably is still impacting people younger than him. And it was part of his job, and his job kind of revealed it, because he was looking for it. He wasn't just looking for a career. He was looking for, what am I about? What am I here for?
Yeah.
And so it influenced that. But that took time. That developed over time, him being in it, him trying things, him experimenting with things,
that's
and
cool.
understanding who he was. Yeah.
That's cool. I think so much of it is, again, going back to the personality tests and the self-discovery, we're going to find our calling when we're trying to serve other people.
Right.
Your calling is given to you, but it's for other people.
Yeah. That's great.
And I love the fact that it was when he looked outside of himself. And it's like, you're probably not going to find your purpose sitting at home, like reading. It's going to be in relationship. It's going to be in being generous with your time and your energy and your emotional, however you're connecting with people in this season. It's probably going to be among meeting the real needs of other people. Yeah.
That was a little bit that's why that Frederick Buechner quote has always caught me. That we used in the message. It's where your calling is, where your greatest gladness in the world's greatest hunger meet, because it's going to have to include other people, and it has to include other people because that was part of God's original purpose. That not just you would be with him and be like him, but that you would help others be with him and like him.
Like I think of Abraham. I'm going to give you a bunch of things. I'm going to give you a bunch of opportunities. I'm going to take you crazy places, but it's so that you could be a blessing. All nations will be blessed. And what if that was the vision for your life? Like, I want to be a blessing to the nations. That'd be pretty epic. Maybe talk about, it's just very candidly, it's a little tricky when you're a pastor talking about this. Because people are like, well, you're called to be a pastor. It's like, yeah, that's true. And I've also known people who, my father-in-law, he was a pastor for a season, and he also was an apartment complex manager, and now he runs his own business. Like, that's true. But maybe talk about some of your experience with calling and maybe even being in ministry, bumping into some of those unique callings and unique giftings God made you to do, in your own journey. And I know it's a little layered, and
Yeah.
people may say, well, that's good for you because you're a clergyman. But maybe just share and give people a window in that for you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first I would just say, yeah, I mean, I think everybody's calling, you're right, impacts other people. Everybody's calling is a ministry calling, even if it's not vocational.
Right.
There is the
Right.
priesthood of all believers. You're a priest wherever you are.
Right.
The question is, will we live that?
Yeah. Yep.
And some people's calling outside of the church will have far greater kingdom impact than my calling expressed inside the church.
Yep. Say that again.
Some people's calling expressed outside the church through their vocation or through their job, whatever, or skill sets, whatever it is, will have a much more significant and greater impact than my calling, which happens to be expressed in the church.
Pause the video or the podcast you're listening to, and just think about that for 20 seconds. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, all right, yeah. And I love that, and
Yeah.
I want to encourage that and
For
fan
sure.
the flame in it.
Right.
So for me, yeah, before I clearly knew my calling,
Yeah.
before I knew what that was,
Yeah.
I knew I was supposed to be in vocational ministry. So
Yeah.
like everybody else, I'm in it and I'm trying to figure it out. I'm
Yep.
trying to learn the calling
Yeah.
and what is it.
Yep.
And it's like I'm trying all these things on. Well, what if I'm like this? And what if I do this? And I'm trying to be like other people,
Right.
Because that's what
Yeah.
you think, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be like that person, or I really wish I could do what they do. And gradually, over the course of time, I started to watch. Okay, where are the impact things? Where's the fruit? What makes me glad, and where do I feel like I seem to intersect people's hunger most? And for me, a large portion of that came around two intersecting things, and it was really called to lead and called to teach, called to lead and called to teach. And if I break it down to a word, which I was part of a small group a year or so ago that we kind of did this, and somebody's kind of leading us through this process. If I even distill it to a word, I just say I'm called to be a pointer, and like to point people to
cool.
Jesus and to walk with Jesus. I'm just called to point in that direction.
That's cool.
And that's this merger of leadership and teaching giftings that are shaping the calling. But I had to stumble into those and learn and try and everything else.
Yeah.
But that impacts my life everywhere.
Yeah.
That not just here. So sometimes my girls will say to me, "We know Dad's going to go into preacher mode at the table when he pushes his plate away and uses his hands." And
Yes.
there's probably some truth in that, right?
Yeah.
But I often say to them, I would probably communicate to you this way regardless of what my occupation was.
Sure.
I could work at Home Depot, be a school teacher, be a coach somewhere, whatever. I would probably still communicate this because part of my calling is to lead and teach. That's the expression of that, and to point people to Jesus and with Jesus. So I've tried other things and other expressions, but my gladness doesn't intersect people's hunger in those pockets.
Yeah.
Those seem to intersect in those callings. But I mean, I was probably literally early mid-30s before those truly really started to intersect clearly for me. Lots of trial and error, lots of mining those gifts and to mine the expression of those gifts.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're still pushing that around, you're not alone, and nothing's messed up with you.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why I say hold loosely. Hold careers loosely, hold college loosely, hold ideals, the ideals of who you're supposed to be loosely. And part of the way I knew I wasn't clearly in line with that yet is even if I was part of something great, if it didn't stir deep gladness, I just knew there's something more than that. Now, inside our giftings and inside of our calling, there is suffering. Jesus warned us about suffering, told us, prepped us for it. But even in the suffering, there's a gladness about, this is what I'm made to do.
Yeah.
And I want to do it again, even when it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you're talking about the dinner table thing, maybe something that would be helpful for all of us is just to start, like you said, get away from the compartmentalizing and just to start saying, okay, in every aspect of my life, Jesus wants me to be with him, to be made more like him, and then help others do the same. Every single thing. And maybe some of our frustration comes from not integrating different parts and trying to live, what's my spiritual calling, but then I go to work and it's different, but Jesus sees the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't you think part of the weight we carry is we're carrying several different parts? And the ease of the walk with Jesus comes, and the burden is light when we carry an integrated walk. I mean, that's right. I give you a burden that's light.
Yeah.
We make it heavy when we're like, oh, that's my home life, that's my work life, that's my, and Jesus
Yeah.
like, that's your life.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you talked about, so the gladness and then the hunger or the hurting in the world, putting those together, and then how that fuels how you earn money, right? How you give it away, and then how you save it. Like John Wesley said, right? Like earn all you can, save all you can, so you can give all you can.
Yeah.
And maybe just talk around that. Like how does being at home with that, and even being in process of discovering that, start to shape and change how we earn and save and then ultimately give and use money?
Yeah, and I've really learned this from watching people around me. Some who have the ability to make great wealth and some who don't. It's not a matter of quantity.
Yeah.
But what I've watched is when people find their calling, even if their calling doesn't feel directly connected to the job all the time, their job takes on different meaning. And the joy of the job takes on different meaning because they think, look, I'm here to earn money. I have to earn money, but I'm not earning money just to pay a bill.
Sure.
I have this job and I'm paying some bills so I can live my calling. And again, things get more connected and there's a deeper satisfaction there. And then it does feel like over the course of time, the job and the calling start to connect more. It's like, I can even live that here. Or, and I mentioned this in the message, one of my friends would say, I do my job and I'm really good at it. And he does the job with great joy because it funds a calling that he lives almost exclusively outside of his job. Now, he's living in the image of God and making a difference in his workplace, but his calling is unique enough that it's expressed outside of it, the lion's share of his calling. And it just brings joy to his job to say, this helps me fund this.
Yep.
As opposed to this helps me fund my life, or just this helps me fund my experiences, or this helps me fund, we were just before we were starting, we were talking about retirement. How do you think about retirement?
Yeah.
Which is a noble thing, and we need to do it. We need to be wise and have plans there. But when we attach to our calling, our job becomes about more than just funding our retirement. It becomes about, I use money in my life to live my calling to help make a difference.
Right. Yeah, and retirement's a season where you can be really flexible and creative with that.
Right.
If
I
right. Put in the right steps now.
Correct.
And prioritize it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, is there anything else in that whole thing? Like obviously there's spiritual gifts inside of that. There's where are you right now that you can make a difference. There's the money piece of it. Anything in that whole thing that you might just want to touch on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think the biggest thing is I don't think calling is something we learn and go live. I think it's something we attempt to live and learn as we go. And so where are we right now?
Yeah.
And let's practice it.
Yeah.
And that's high school, college, job, stay-at-home parent, single person. Where am I right now?
Yeah.
And where do I think my gladness could meet people's hunger?
Yeah.
And I'm just going to try things.
Yeah.
I'm just going to try things. And we can do it right now.
Yeah.
The temptation, the pattern of the world can be try and learn it and master it and then go do it.
Yeah.
Calling, I just don't think calling works that way.
Yeah.
And if we had time and we talked about Jesus and the disciples, it didn't work that way for them either.
Sure.
It's here's a couple things, go out and do that. Let's come back and talk about it. Go out and do it again, come back and talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's more than just skill set development. I think that's refining of calling development in the disciples.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Anya just commented on Facebook. Yeah, I think we can feel whole only when we incorporate all aspects of life and live for Jesus. Like so much would say, I don't feel complete. I don't feel whole. But we look at our lives in 13 different containers, and then we invite Jesus into maybe 2 of them or 3 if it's really going downhill. Yeah, for sure. Like wherever people are, there's a chance to live out, an experiment with calling.
Yeah.
And just try to, I think that's one thing that's been huge for me is just get outside of my own, trying to fuel my own passions and desires and trust that God's got to bring other people that are going to do that for me. And I need to do it for them,
right?
And be generous, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is around, when we talk about what you earn, what you say, what you give, all those kind of things. When we get calling too, we release some of the guilt. I think sometimes in wealthier parts of the world, like that we live in, we can wrestle with some guilt, sometimes self-imposed, sometimes other imposed about, oh, we have money. But part of the reason Jesus talks about it so much too is I think he's trying to say, yeah, look, let me help you live with money without guilt. If you live out of a calling, you will gladly invest your money in that calling.
Yeah.
And you don't have to live with weird guilt and weird shame. You will naturally give a bunch away. You will naturally invest in the calling because the calling, when you find it, will be so compelling that you can't resist it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'd say if you're watching today and it's really, intriguing or you feel like, man, I really should spend some time, I just encourage you, go to thejchurch.com/resources, and there's spiritual gifts tests, there's videos, there's a video series we put together that would help just say, how has God made me? How does he want to use me right where I am? And maybe, if you're looking for more financial type things, we were just talking about, Dave Ramsey. If you just search Dave Ramsey on YouTube, you'll find lots of good stuff just about really practical ways to be a good steward of a God who is generous. Then I just say, again, look around you. Look around you at the people, whether it's you have energy to give, whether you have a time or a talent to give, or whether you have resources to give, money to give. Be generous. Look around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right on.
Yeah. So if you're listening or you're watching, thanks so much for joining us time. I hope it's been helpful and encouraging for you. And if you haven't yet, check out part of the God Life Money series on YouTube or on our podcast. And we'll talk to you soon.
See you soon.
Thanks a bunch.